On the 28th of June 1914, a 19-year-old student at a school assassination the Austria-Hungary prince, and the one incident triggered Great War. A war that lasted 4 years in which more than 20 million people lost their lives. A war in which several ancient empires came to an end. A war that was fought across multiple countries and continents. Today we know of this war as the World War I. Doesn't it sound very sensational? Because one of the single events, World War I, broke across the world. If we could go back to the past time in a time machine, and if we could prevent this assassination, would be there no world war in the world? It is not simple, my friends. When there is large-scale war like this, there is a long and complex chain of reasons driving it. And there is one such incident that caused a spark. Imagine if there is a mountain of dynamites here, and I use a small matchstick to blow up the entire mountain. The following blast would not be because of matchstick. There was a mountain of dynamites there. That's why it happened. Come in this video, let's understand World War I and how it started. But first, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more gripping historical information. When people ask how the First World War began, it's often couched in terms of a domino effect, a series of events that were almost destined. But what I would say is that if anyone had suggested in June 1914 in Britain that World War might be about to break out, and they would be met with disbelief. Britain hadn't fought a war on the continent since the final defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo, 99 years previously. Rather than a war in Europe, Britain was primarily occupied with its internal affairs. As the 20th century dawned, Britain was one of the greatest powers on Earth. It ruled over this vast global empire. I mean, it's so big that every fourth person on Earth owes its allegiance to the British crown. Britain was the world's merchant sailor. His flag encircled the globe. 60% of the vessels on any ocean were his. The lifeblood of the British Empire was the sea. The Royal Navy policed the waves so that its merchant ships could trade across the globe. This brought the British Empire vast wealth, but not all of its citizens were able to share in it. Many overseas subjects were demanding greater freedom from the empire to control their affairs, while at home domestic issues threatened to boil over. There's this huge inequality of wealth that underpins British life at the turn of the 20th century. Only 2/3 of men have the right to vote. Absolutely no woman has the right to vote. So I'd say by the time you get to 1914, this is quite a volatile country. The most divisive issue, however, was that of home rule for Ireland. Some people in Ireland wanted to be ruled from Dublin rather than Westminster, while others were bitterly opposed to this, including some vocal British politicians and a sizable contingent in the north of Ireland who considered themselves to be British. As the Home Rule Bill made its way through Parliament, rival militias began to arm themselves on either side of the issue. There was a very real threat that this was going to spill over into violence in the summer of 1914, and so to suggest to people in Britain that the conflict that was about to occur would come from Europe rather than from Ireland, most people would have been very, very shocked to hear that. But while domestic tensions were rising in Britain, new tensions were coming to the fore in Europe. Germany was the new kid on the block with big ambitions. After defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, the most powerful German state, Prussia, allied with smaller German states to create a united Germany, but this new nation wanted an empire of its own. Britain initially admired this new nation, and Britain thought as a friend, but Imperial Germany soon began to threaten Britain's sense of supremacy. It was determination to up its industrial output, up its military strength, and most crucially for Britain to build a rival fleet of warships. German ships maneuver in the cold waters of the North Sea. This new German navy was a threat to Britain's naval dominance, the glue that held the empire together, and something for which Britain could not stand. That rivalry then turned into an arms race as each nation tried to outproduce the other with ever greater feats of technology. This culminated in the production of dreadnought battleships, which were seen as the nuclear weapons of their day. That factor means Britain now started to see Germany as a threat. By the time you get to 1907, Europe split into two opposing camps. Germany had disturbed the delicate balance of power in Europe. France, fearing this new empire on their doorstep, allied with Russia in the east. An unlikely friendship for two of Europe's most ideologically opposed nations. That then left Germany feeling surrounded and pushed them to form an alliance with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and to a lesser extent Italy. Finally, Britain and its empire, afraid of German domination on the continent, drifted closer to France and Russia, though without going as far as allying. You've got Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and you've got France, Russia, and to some extent Britain. There's still no immediate reason for war between the two. It would take a crisis to turn tensions into an armed conflict. And that crisis came in the summer of 1914. The Balkans in Southeast Europe had been a hotbed of unrest for some time, with 2 wars in the preceding 3 years. Those wars had made Austria-Hungary's neighbor Serbia much larger, prompting tensions between the two nations to rise even further. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in June by a Serbian-backed terrorist, Austria-Hungary felt it had no choice but to assert its dominance. Austria-Hungary sets out to punish Serbia if it wants to quash support for Serbian nationalism. It's encouraged by its ally Germany. So after Serbia failed to meet the terms of a very draconian ultimatum, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This act of war stirred up old tensions and anxieties right across the continent because it drew supporters and allies on both sides. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia came in to back the Serbs in defense of a fellow Slavic nation. When Germany, in support of its ally, then declared war on Russia, that brought France into the war on Russia's side. Italy, however, did not join the war, as its alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary was a defensive pact. In a matter of weeks, then, Europe's largest powers were primed for war, but Britain was still in 2 minds over whether it should be involved. It agonized over whether to support Russia and France. I think at the heart of Britain's anxieties came down really to Britain, fearing German domination of Europe, because if a victorious but hostile Germany dominated the continent and threatened Britain's position in the world, that was just intolerable for Britain. The tipping point came thanks to Germany's war plans. Hoping to defeat France quickly before Russia had a chance to mobilize its forces, Germany attempted to skirt around the French defenses in Alsace-Lorraine by attacking through neutral Belgium, a country Britain had sworn to protect. On the 4th of August, Britain issued an ultimatum to Germany which was ignored, which ended in Britain declaring war on Germany. Britain declaring war on Germany also meant its global empire was at war and had a conflict set up that became rapidly a world war. The causes of the First World War are complex. They're still debated to this day. The nations didn't realize it at the time, but their attempts to defend what they perceived as their national interests created a war that would shape Europe for decades to come. Most participants expected the war to be over by Christmas. But as we know, the reality was very different. The First World War became what we would call a total war. These nations pitted against each other, millions of men fighting on land, on the sea, and in the air, and modern weaponry causing mass casualties. Ultimately, the war broke the empires of Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, and forced the US onto the world stage, and the war also laid the seeds for future conflict in places like the Middle East. So it ultimately defined the shape of Europe and the world in the 20th century, and this is how it all began.